The new instructor. Principal Silovax's crystalline form shimmered with anxiety as they hovered near the transport pad. The quantum-encrypted message from the Galactic Education Board still resonated in their neural matrix. To promote interspecies understanding and comprehensive physical education, your institution has been selected to pilot the Deathworlder integration program. The transport pad hummed to life, its soft blue glow intensifying until it materialized a figure that made Silovax's entire crystalline structure vibrate with instinctive fear. The human stood approximately 1.7 meters tall, with dark hair pulled back in what their dossier called a ponytail. Her athletic frame, wrapped in standard-issue instructor's attire, radiated the infamous high-gravity world strength that had made humans legendary across the galaxy. "Sarah Chen," she said, extending her hand with a smile. "Thank you for this opportunity, Principal Silovax." The principal's translator chimed as they carefully extended a crystalline appendage in response. "Welcome to the Galactic Academy of Physical Sciences, Instructor Chen. I trust your quantum jump was comfortable." "Perfectly fine, thank you. I'm excited to start working with your students." As they glided through the Academy's corridors, Sarah noticed how other faculty members quickly found reasons to duck into nearby rooms or alter their trajectory to avoid crossing their path. The few who couldn't avoid them maintained what they clearly hoped was a safe distance. "Your credentials are impressive," Silovax said, trying to maintain professional composure. "Though I must admit, some parents have expressed concerns about having a human instructor." Sarah nodded, having expected this reaction. "I understand. Humans can seem intimidating at first, but I've developed specialized techniques for teaching physical education to multiple species. I promise to be extremely careful with everyone's unique physiological needs." They arrived at the main gymnasium, a vast chamber with variable gravity controls and adaptive terrain features. Inside, a class of 20 students representing various species from across the galaxy waited nervously. Some floated in gas form, others undulated in gelatinous masses, while a few stood on crystalline or chitinous appendages. "Class," Silovax announced, their voice resonating through multiple frequency ranges to ensure all students could perceive it. "This is Instructor Chen. She will be taking over your physical education curriculum." A wave of worried murmurs rippled through the assembled students. A gaseous being named Zephyr condensed slightly in anxiety, while a crystalline student named Prix developed small stress fractures along their outer facets. Sarah stepped forward, her movements deliberately slow and smooth. "Hello, everyone. I know having the human instructor might seem scary, but I'm here to help each of you develop your physical capabilities in ways that work for your specific biology. We'll start simple and work our way up together." A brave silicon-based student raised a vibrating appendage. "Is it true that humans regularly expose themselves to micro-impacts for recreation?" Sarah laughed softly, causing several students to drift backward. "You mean running?" "Yes, but don't worry. I won't ask any of you to do that. Instead, we'll focus on movements and exercises that suit each of your unique forms. For instance," she turned to a gelatinous student. "What's your name?" "B. Blub," the student rippled nervously. "Blub, your species has amazing fluid dynamics. Have you ever tried controlled oscillation exercises to improve your membrane strength?" The student's surface tensed with interest. "And no, instructor. Would you like to demonstrate with me? I promise we won't do anything that might compromise your surface tension." After a moment's hesitation, Blub moved forward. Under Sarah's gentle guidance, they began a simple movement pattern that caused their gelatinous form to ripple in controlled waves. The other students watched in fascination as Blub's initial fear gave way to obvious enjoyment. "Excellent control," Sarah praised. "You see, everyone, physical education isn't about copying human exercises. It's about finding the best ways to develop your own natural abilities." As the demonstration continued, the tension in the room gradually began to dissipate. A photosynthetic student even ventured to ask about exercises to improve chloroplast efficiency, while a crystalline being inquired about safe ways to increase structural flexibility. Principal Tylovax observed from the doorway, their crystal matrix relaxing slightly. Perhaps this experiment wasn't going to be the disaster they'd feared. As Sarah continued to interact with each student, taking time to understand their unique physical characteristics and limitations, something unexpected began to happen. The students' fear started giving way to curiosity. By the end of the first session, when Sarah had worked with each student to develop a personalized movement plan, the atmosphere had transformed. Even the most nervous students were showing signs of engagement, and Blub was enthusiastically demonstrating their new oscillation patterns to classmates. As the students filed out, Principal Tylovax approached Sarah. "Impressive, Instructor Chen. Though I feel compelled to warn you, tomorrow's class includes several plasma-based beings and one student who exists partially in quantum superposition." Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. "Perfect. I've been developing some fascinating techniques for incorporating quantum uncertainty principles into physical education. This is exactly why I wanted to teach here. Every student presents a unique opportunity to explore new ways of understanding physical development." Watching her eager expression, Tylovax realized that perhaps humans weren't just the terrifying Deathworlders of legend. They were also, in their own strange way, some of the most adaptable beings in the galaxy. As Sarah began enthusiastically outlining her plans for tomorrow's class, the principal made a note to update the Academy board. The Deathworlder integration program might just work after all. Breaking barriers. 2 standard cycles into her tenure at the Galactic Academy, Sarah Chen stood in the gymnasium's control center, making final adjustments to the environmental settings. Behind her, Prix, the crystalline student who had been watching her preparations with growing curiosity, chimed softly with questions. "Instructor Chen, are you certain about today's activity? The concept of team sports seems unnecessarily aggressive." Sarah smiled as she calibrated the gravity fields. "Trust me, Prix. What I'm planning will work for everyone. Remember how well last week's modified momentum exercises went?" The crystalline being's facets flickered with the equivalent of a blush. They had indeed excelled at the exercises, discovering that their crystalline structure could channel kinetic energy in fascinating new ways. Still, today's planned activity seemed far more ambitious. The rest of the class began filtering in, each student entering their species-appropriate environmental bubble. The gym's adaptive technology created perfect conditions for each being, from the plasma students' containment fields to the perfect pressure systems for the gaseous entities. "Today," Sarah announced, "we're going to try something called Orbital Dynamics Ball." She gestured to a collection of soft light spheres floating in the center of the room. "I've modified this traditional human game to work with everyone's unique abilities." Zephyr, the gaseous student, condensed anxiously. "You mean we have to catch things?" "Not exactly. Watch this." Sarah tapped a control, and one of the soft light spheres began to glow. "These aren't physical balls. They're energy constructs. Each one is calibrated to interact differently with different types of matter." "Zephyr, try passing through one." Hesitantly, the gaseous student drifted toward a sphere. As they intersected with it, the ball took on their gaseous properties, becoming a swirling cloud that maintained its spherical shape. "Perfect." Sarah beamed. "Now, Blub, see if you can receive it." The gelatinous student extended a pseudopod nervously when Zephyr directed the gaseous sphere toward them. It transformed again, becoming a wobbling liquid bubble that Blub could easily manipulate with their surface tension. Excitement began to ripple through the class as students realized this wasn't the threatening physical contact sport they had feared. Even the quantum superposition student, who existed in multiple states simultaneously, found they could interact with the spheres across all their potential positions. Sarah divided them into teams, carefully mixing different species to encourage cooperation. "The goal isn't to compete," she explained, "but to create the most interesting and efficient energy transfers between team members." Think of it as a collaborative physics experiment. Pricks, who had been hanging back, suddenly found themselves central to their team's strategy. Their crystalline structure could refract the energy spheres, splitting them into multiple trajectories that their gaseous and plasma teammates could simultaneously interact with. The gymnasium came alive with motion. Plasma students curved the spheres through elegant arcs, while the quantum student created fascinating probability patterns. Gelatinous students discovered they could reshape the spheres into more aerodynamic forms, and crystalline beings learned to create dazzling displays of refracted energy. As the class progressed, something remarkable happened. The students began to forget their fear of their human instructor. They were too absorbed in exploring the possibilities of their new game, calling out to each other in excitement when they discovered new ways to manipulate the energy spheres. "Instructor Chen," Blub called out, their entire form wiggling with enthusiasm. "Look what happens when I oscillate at the same frequency as the sphere." Sarah watched in delight as Blub demonstrated a complex manipulation that sent the sphere spinning in a perfect helix. "Excellent physics application, Blub. Can anyone else build on that principle?" The plasma students immediately began experimenting with resonant frequencies, while the gaseous beings tried matching their density to create new effects. Even the usually reserved crystalline students were soon attempting to harmonize their lattice vibrations with the spheres. Principal Tylovax, who had come to observe, found themselves drawn into the atmosphere of discovery. "Remarkable," they chimed to Sarah. "You've managed to transform physical education into a practical application of quantum dynamics." "That's the beauty of adapting human concepts to galactic education," Sarah replied, watching as her students continued to experiment. "Sometimes the best way to learn is through play, even if you're a plasma being or exist in quantum superposition." As the class wound down, the students were reluctant to stop. Several of them lingered, asking Sarah about possibilities for additional practice time. Pricks, in particular, seemed transformed by the experience. "Instructor Chen," they chimed as the others filed out. "I never thought physical education could be like this. We always assumed human activities would be, well, terrifying." Sarah suggested with a gentle smile. "Yes, but this was beautiful, scientific, almost like art." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly what I've been trying to show everyone. Human physical education isn't just about strength or endurance. It's about understanding and celebrating how different beings move and interact with their environment." As she began shutting down the gym's systems for the day, Sarah couldn't help but feel satisfied. The barriers weren't just breaking. They were dissolving into something entirely new. Tomorrow's class would build on today's success, pushing the boundaries even further. After all, she thought, watching the last energy sphere fade away, that's what human teachers did best, finding ways to turn the impossible into the achievable. The incident. No one expected the quantum stabilizer to fail during mid-session. The Galactic Academy's safety systems were supposed to be foolproof, with redundancies upon redundancies. Yet somehow, as Sarah's class was deep into their third round of orbital dynamics ball, the unthinkable happened. The first warning was subtle, a slight flicker in the environmental containment fields. Sarah, always vigilant of her students' safety, noticed immediately. Her human reflexes, evolved on a death world where split-second decisions meant survival, kicked in before the automated systems could even begin their emergency protocols. "Everyone freeze." Her voice cut through the excited chatter of the class. The students, now well-trained in responding to their human instructor's commands, instantly halted their activities. Then the stabilizer failed completely. The quantum superposition student, Helix, suddenly began to collapse into a single state, a potentially fatal situation for their species. Simultaneously, the plasma containment field surrounding the high-energy students began to destabilize. The gaseous students started to dissipate uncontrollably, while the crystalline beings, including Pricks, developed stress fractures from the sudden gravitational fluctuations. "Emergency positions," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. She moved with shocking speed, her human muscles pushing against the failing gravity controls as she reached the environmental control panel. Pricks, channel your fracture energy into a focusing crystal. Zephyr, use your dispersion to create a buffer zone. The students, despite their terror, responded to the authority in her voice. Pricks, fighting through their own structural stress, formed their crystalline body into a makeshift energy focus. Zephyr and the other gaseous students expanded to create a protective cloud around their more vulnerable classmates. Sarah's fingers flew across the control panel, her human adaptability allowing her to process multiple emergency protocols simultaneously. Blub, I need your fluid dynamics. Create a damping field around the plasma students. The gelatinous student, showing remarkable courage, flowed into position, their membrane oscillating at precisely the frequencies Sarah had taught them during their private training sessions. The plasma students, their containment fields now critically unstable, found themselves supported by Blub's improvised membrane barrier. But it was Helix's situation that was most dire. The quantum superposition student's very existence was threatening to collapse into a single probability state, effectively death for their species. Sarah knew she had mere seconds to act. Everyone, remember the energy transfer exercises. She was already moving as she spoke, her human body pushing through the chaotic gravitational fields. Pricks, I need a crystal resonance pattern, just like we practiced. Plasma team, prepare for a controlled energy burst. The beauty of Sarah's previous lessons became suddenly, startlingly clear. What had seemed like simple games and exercises were revealed as preparation for exactly this kind of crisis. Each student knew their role, understood their capabilities, and most importantly, trusted their human instructor's guidance. Pricks aligned their crystal structure, creating a complex resonance pattern. The plasma students, still contained by Blub's membrane, released careful bursts of energy that Pricks's crystal form captured and focused. Sarah, reaching through the gravitational chaos, used the focused energy to create a localized stability field around Helix. Hold on, she encouraged her quantum student, her human empathy evident even in this moment of crisis. Feel the probability waves. Remember your exercises. You control the collapse, it doesn't control you. Principal Xylovax burst into the gymnasium with the emergency response team, only to stop short at the sight before them. Instead of the expected disaster, they found Sarah's class working in perfect harmony to contain the crisis. Each student was applying their unique abilities in ways that seemed to defy their supposed limitations. The emergency team quickly restored the primary systems, but it was Sarah and her students who had prevented catastrophe in those crucial first moments. As the situation stabilized and the last backup systems came online, a profound silence fell over the gymnasium. Helix, their quantum state safely re-established, was the first to speak. Instructor Chen, you saved my life. All our lives. Sarah, finally allowing herself to relax slightly, shook her head. No, we saved each other. Everything you did today. That was all you. I just helped you see how to use abilities you already had. Principal Xylovax's crystalline form vibrated with emotion. When we agreed to host a human instructor, we thought we were simply accepting a bold educational experiment. We never imagined that a Deathworlder's training would be exactly what we needed in a crisis. Pricks chimed in, their crystal structure still resonating with residual energy. Instructor Chen didn't just teach us exercises. She taught us how to adapt, how to respond, how to be brave. Blub finished, their gelatinous form still showing traces of the complex patterns they'd used to contain the plasma students. Sarah looked around at her students, beings that most of the galaxy considered fragile or limited, and felt a surge of pride. That's the thing about humans, she said softly. We don't just survive our death world. We learn from it. And everything I learned about surviving, about adapting, about facing the impossible, that's what I've been trying to share with all of you. The incident marked a turning point at the Galactic Academy. What had begun as a controversial experiment in interspecies education had become something far more profound. Sarah's class had demonstrated that with proper training, understanding, and trust, even the most unlikely combination of species could achieve the impossible. As the emergency teams finished their work and the students began to disperse, Sarah noticed something remarkable. None of them showed the fear they once had of her human presence. Instead, they looked at her with something new in their various sensory organs: respect, trust, and perhaps most surprisingly, understanding. The Deathworld teacher had shown them that survival wasn't just about being the strongest or the most resilient. It was about working together, adapting and finding strength in their differences. It was perhaps the most human lesson of all. The challenge. The news of the quantum stabilizer incident spread through the galactic educational community like a shockwave through space. While many praised the unprecedented display of interspecies cooperation, others saw it as proof of their worst fears about human involvement in galactic education. Administrator Orcs of the rival Centaurian Academy for Elevated Studies arrived unannounced one morning, their electromagnetic form crackling with barely contained skepticism. Sarah was in the middle of demonstrating a new technique for plasma crystal energy transfer when the administrator floated into her gymnasium. "So this is the famous human instructor." Vorks's translated voice carried an unmistakable tone of condescension. "Teaching our student species to behave like primitives from a death world." Principal Xylovax, who had accompanied Vorks, vibrated with diplomatic discomfort. Administrator, Instructor Chen's methods have shown remarkable results. Results. Vorks interrupted, their electromagnetic field pulsing dramatically. Teaching delicate crystalline beings to channel kinetic energy. Encouraging plasma forms to participate in primitive games. This is not education. It's endangerment. Sarah straightened to her full height, but kept her voice calm. Her students watched nervously, many still remembering how she had guided them through the crisis. Administrator Vorks, every exercise we do is scientifically calibrated for each student's physiological capabilities. Perhaps you'd like to observe a full session. "Oh, I'll do better than that," Vorks crackled. "I challenge your class to compete against my students in the upcoming inter-academy coordination trials. Let's see how your primitive methods fare against proper galactic educational techniques." A tense silence fell over the gymnasium. The coordination trials were prestigious events where schools demonstrated their students' physical and mental development. They were also, traditionally, segregated by species due to the vast physiological differences between galactic races. "An interesting proposal," Sarah replied, surprising everyone with a smile. "But let's make it more interesting. Instead of segregating by species, what if both schools entered mixed teams? After all, that's what we've been practicing here." Vorks's electromagnetic field flickered with what might have been amusement. "You want to pit your hodgepodge of mixed species teams against specialized groups. Very well. When you lose, you'll admit that humans have no place in galactic education. And when we win," Sarah countered, "you'll acknowledge that diversity and adaptation are strengths, not weaknesses." After Vorks departed in a crackle of electromagnetic energy, Sarah turned to her nervous students. "I know what you're thinking. The coordination trials have always been segregated for a reason. But everything we've been doing, every game, every exercise, every adaptation, has been preparing you for exactly this kind of challenge." Prix's crystalline form chimed anxiously. "But instructor, the trials include events like energy flow manipulation, quantum state navigation, and multi-dimensional coordination. No single species can compete in all categories." "Exactly," Sarah's eyes sparkled. "But who said any single species has to? Remember the stabilizer incident. You all worked together, combining your abilities in ways nobody thought possible. That's our advantage." Over the next few weeks, Sarah's class trained with renewed purpose. They developed strategies that played to each species' strengths while covering others' limitations. Blood's fluid dynamics complemented the plasma student's energy manipulation. Prix's crystalline refraction enhanced Helix's quantum state control. Zephyr and the other gaseous beings learned to create complex atmospheric conditions that benefited everyone. The day before the trials, Sarah gathered her class for a final practice session. "Tomorrow, we're not just competing for ourselves," she told them. "We're showing the galaxy what's possible when different species work together. When I first arrived, you were afraid of me because I came from a death world. But living on a death world taught humans something crucial. Survival isn't just about individual strength. It's about adaptation, cooperation, and finding ways to turn apparent weaknesses into strengths." Helix, now existing confidently in multiple quantum states, spoke up. "Like how my quantum uncertainty used to be seen as a liability, but now it's an advantage in team coordination." "Exactly," Sarah nodded. "Every one of you has something unique to contribute. Together, you're not just overcoming your limitations, you're redefining what's possible." As the class ran through their final preparations, Principal Tylovax observed from the doorway. They had taken a huge risk in hiring a human instructor, but watching these students now, confident, coordinated, and working together in ways that defied conventional wisdom, they knew it had been worth it. Tomorrow would be more than just a competition. It would be a demonstration of what humanity could bring to galactic society. Not just their strength or their survival instincts, but their unique ability to see potential where others saw limitations, to find unity in diversity, and to turn the challenges of a death world into lessons that could benefit all species. The students left that evening not just ready for competition, but eager to show the galaxy what they had become under their human instructor's guidance. They were no longer afraid of the human in their midst. Instead, they had learned to embody some of humanity's most remarkable traits: adaptability, determination, and the ability to face impossible odds with unwavering courage. Sarah watched them go, feeling a fierce pride in how far they had come. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for her class, but for the future of galactic education. The Death World teacher and her unlikely students were about to show the galaxy what was possible when you stopped letting fear define your limitations. Victory in unity. The Galactic Academy's competition arena hummed with energy on the day of the Inter-Academy Coordination Trials. Spectators from across the sector had gathered to witness what many were calling the Death World experiment. Administrator Vorx's students, each grouped by species, moved through their warm-up routines with precise, traditional form. Sarah Chen's class, in contrast, attracted stunned whispers as they entered the arena. Instead of separating by species, they moved as integrated units, each group a carefully choreographed mix of different beings. Crystalline students provided structural support for plasma formations, while gaseous beings created optimal atmospheric conditions for their teammates. "Remember," Sarah told them quietly, "we're not here to compete as individuals. We're here to show what unity looks like." The first event was energy flow manipulation. Traditionally, plasma beings dominated this category. Administrator Vorx's plasma students took their position, their containment fields humming with confidence. But when Sarah's team stepped forward, it wasn't just plasma students. Prix's crystalline structure served as a focusing array, while Blub's gelatinous form created a dynamic containment matrix. Zephyr and other gaseous students generated precise atmospheric currents that the plasma students used to amplify their energy patterns. The result was unprecedented, a display of energy manipulation that combined the precision of crystal focusing, the fluid dynamics of gelatinous beings, the atmospheric control of gaseous entities, and the raw power of plasma forms. The judges, their sensory organs struggling to process what they were seeing, had to create a new scoring category. "Impossible," Vorx crackled. "This isn't how the events are meant to be performed." Sarah smiled. "No, it's how they could always have been performed, if we'd looked past our preconceptions." The quantum state navigation event brought another surprise. Instead of relying solely on quantum state beings like Helix, Sarah's team had developed a revolutionary approach. Crystalline students created probability matrices through their lattice structures, while plasma students generated precise energy fields that gaseous beings use to stabilize quantum fluctuations. Event after event, Sarah's students demonstrated what she had been teaching them all along: that true strength comes not from individual capabilities, but from learning to combine different abilities in innovative ways. The final event was multi-dimensional coordination, traditionally the most challenging due to its requirement for simultaneous action across multiple planes of existence. Administrator Vorx's teams competed separately, each species performing within their natural dimensional limitations. Sarah's class approached it differently. They had practiced a revolutionary technique that Sarah called dimensional harmonics. Helix's quantum uncertainty created baseline vibrations that Prix's crystal structure amplified. Plasma students generated energy fields that Blub and other gelatinous beings shaped into multi-dimensional corridors. Gaseous students maintained precise environmental conditions throughout the dimensional shifts. The result was beautiful and profound: a perfect symphony of different species working in harmony across dimensions. The audience, including many who had been skeptical of human teaching methods, watched in stunned silence as barriers between species quite literally dissolved. When the final scores were tallied, it wasn't even close. Sarah's class hadn't just won. They had redefined what was possible in galactic physical education. But the real victory wasn't in the scores. It was in what they had proved. Administrator Vorx floated silently for a long moment before approaching Sarah. Their electromagnetic field, usually so rigid with certainty, flickered with something that might have been humility. "I was wrong," Vorx admitted, their translated voice carrying across the now quiet arena. "What your students demonstrated today wasn't primitive at all. It was evolutionary." Principal Tylovax's crystalline form sparkled with pride. Perhaps this is why humans have survived their death world, not just because of their physical capabilities, but because they understand something fundamental about survival itself. Sarah looked at her students, no longer afraid, no longer limited by their supposed weaknesses, but standing tall, or floating, or undulating, or existing in quantum superposition, with the confidence of beings who had discovered their true potential. "That's the real lesson of Earth," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our world taught us that survival isn't about being the strongest individual. It's about finding ways to work together, to adapt, to turn differences into strengths. Every challenge on our death world forced us to become more creative, more cooperative, more willing to see possibilities where others saw limitations." The impact of the trial spread quickly through the galactic educational community. Within weeks, other academies began requesting information about Sarah's teaching methods. The Galactic Education Board launched a comprehensive review of traditional species-segregated teaching practices. But perhaps the most profound change was in how the galaxy viewed humans. They were still seen as Deathworlders, yes, but now that term carried new meaning. It spoke not just of physical prowess, but of an adaptability and creativity that could transform galactic society. Back in her gymnasium, Sarah watched as her next class filed in, now including transfer students from other academies, all eager to learn the human way of physical education. Prix, who had become her teaching assistant, chimed softly. "Instructor Chen, when you first arrived, we thought having a Deathworlder as a teacher would be terrifying. We never imagined that fear could turn to understanding." Sarah finished with a smile. "That's the thing about humans, Prix. We don't just teach survival. We teach how to thrive. Now, shall we show these new students what's possible when we work together?" As Sarah began her lesson, a new generation of students watched in fascination, no longer seeing a scary Deathworlder, but a teacher who could help them discover strengths they never knew they had. The experiment had become a revolution, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.